This is the Regular Pastor Podcast, a podcast devoted to regular pastors in regular churches. My name is Landon Coleman. I have served as a pastor at Emmanuel Baptist Church for the last 10 years, Emmanuel Baptist in Odessa, Texas. You have found your way to Season 5 of the Regular Pastor Podcast, and in Season 5, we're talking about books and ideas in the day-to-day ministry of regular pastors. The book that I want to talk about today is titled Bad Therapy: Why Kids Aren't Growing Up, and the author is a woman named Abigail Shrier. This book is published by Sentinel in 2024. It clocks in at 297 pages. The last 20 or so are acknowledgments and endnotes, and so this book is a solid 275, 280 page book in a hardback format. The book has 3 parts. There is an introduction at the beginning, and then part 1 contains 3 chapters dealing with the issue how healers can harm, and then part 2 has 7 chapters, the largest section of the book, and part 2 deals with how therapy has gone off the rails. Her title for this part or this section is Therapy Goes Airborne. And then part 3 at the end has 2 chapters. It's a short sort of wrap up for the book. And her title for this final section is Maybe There's Nothing Wrong with Our Kids. And basically in these chapters, she's arguing that maybe, just maybe, every problem doesn't need a solution and every problem doesn't actually require therapy. So that's the layout of the book. Let me tell you a little bit about the author, Abigail Shrier. She writes for the Wall Street Journal. She has 3 degrees, one from Columbia College, one from the University of Oxford, and one from Yale Law School. By profession, she's a journalist. As best I can tell from reading a couple of her books, she doesn't really seem to object to the LGBTQ panoply. She does really not seem to want to pick a fight with adults who want to identify as trans or they want to pursue a gender reassignment surgery. The issues that Shrier is really concerned about are, I use this word tongue-in-cheek, the intersection of the LGBTQ plus movement and children. And that means she is hated by the broader LGBTQ movement. She has a lovely mugshot and a wanted poster and a profile listed on the GLAAD Accountability Project, recognizing dangerous opponents to the LGBTQ movement. Her previous book, Irreversible Damage, was a book that I talked about on the Regular Pastor Podcast, and it was recognized as a best book by The Economist. Let me give you the big idea of this latest book from Shrier, Bad Therapy: Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up. She makes an argument that parents are frantic and hypervigilant and borderline obsessive about the mental health of their children. Combined with that reality, parents are increasingly allowing experts to evict parents from the room and the relationship, and therapists have taught parents that they, the therapists, the experts, need to step in and intervene, and that we, parents, need to engage in gentle parenting or therapeutic parenting. All of this is just sort of in the cultural air we breathe as a therapeutic society. Success in parenting, we're told, is now based on the happiness of your child at any given moment. And all of this therapy, this is Shrier's argument, all of this therapy has not produced high-achieving, well-adjusted children. Her observation, and it's backed up by the data, is that all of this therapy has produced lonely children, anxious children, depressed children, pessimistic children, helpless children, and fearful children. And you may say, that the therapy hasn't caused those things, and you could blame screens or any number of other realities. But her argument is that the therapy has contributed to these unfortunate realities, and even where it hasn't contributed or caused these negative things in our children, it hasn't fixed them. The therapists have instead created a growing and a permanent client pool. And we are now caught in this vicious feedback loop, and someone somehow needs to pull our children off of this feedback loop. So there's some really important ideas in this book just when it comes to parenting and counseling. One important idea is the word iatrogenesis. And the word means originating with the healer. And what Shrier is arguing when she talks about iatrogenesis is that those offering to help, those promising solutions, are actually the ones contributing to the hurt and the problem. She just makes the observation, I could not agree with this more. She makes the observation that talk therapy is not good for everyone. I don't think that she is trying to ban it or say that it's never helpful, but she just says it's not good for everyone, and it's not good in every circumstance. Incessantly talking about everything that's wrong and the worst moments of your life and reliving terrible, horrific things that have happened to you is maybe, just maybe, not the best approach to recovery and healing and wholeness. On page 12, she makes the observation that wanting to help is actually not the same as helping. And therapists often don't recognize they're hurting or contributing to the problem because they themselves are the medicine. Here's a quote from page 12. The therapist often doesn't want to acknowledge that the medicine isn't working because she or he is the medicine. The admission is a little personal. So I think she has some helpful comments about iatrogenesis, things that might originate with the healer, the fact that those wanting to help or claiming to help are actually contributing to the problem, and in some instances causing the problem. Another helpful concept that she talks about in this book is what she would term trauma kings. And when she talks about trauma kings, this is what she's discussing in chapter 6. She's just trying to expose the lie that sounds very scientific, and you hear it all the time, that we literally carry trauma in our body in a physical sense. And she exposes the lie that we carry around the trauma of our ancestors. It's a very postmodern, intersectional, group identity type concept. She points out that when you go to typical talk therapy today, most talk therapists want to begin with a personal history. And that can be because they just want to get to know you, or it can be a hunt for trauma and looking under every rock and bush, trying to diagnose what kind of trauma, looking for someone to blame for your current struggles, and trying to piece together the horrible things that have happened in your life or the good things that haven't happened in your life, to sort of diagnose the struggles that you're going on, the struggles that are going on in your life. And she talks about the fact that these diagnostic lists that our therapists are working off of are so broad that all of us fall into some sort of category or label. The therapist of today, the typical talk therapist, is not going to say you're fine, nothing detrimental has happened to you, and you're normal and you're good. You fall somewhere into a category, into a label, into a diagnosis, and this hunt for trauma and this need to diagnose and label every struggle that we have in life is not a healthy one. It's not a helpful one. The last thing I would point out, just one more helpful idea in the book, is what she calls therapeutic parenting or gentle parenting or affirmative parenting. And the argument of the book is basically that the experts have sold us all a bill of goods when it comes to gentle parenting and affirmative parenting and therapeutic parenting. Parents today too often are finding their own personal validation in the happiness and the success of their children, and that, Shrier rightly points out, is too great a burden for kids to bear. Children are not meant to carry around the validation and the sense of accomplishment of their parents. We are putting too great a weight on our kids. It's no wonder they're anxious and pessimistic and depressed and fearful. We're putting a burden on them that they are not strong enough to carry. And Shrier points out, when it comes to gentle parenting, kids intuitively know, they realize at a really young age that no one is in charge with this approach to parenting. And that's a terrifying thought for a child. No one's in charge. No one's in control. No one's an adult in the room. And every study shows that children thrive. They do best when there's structure and there's an appropriate amount of discipline, and that discipline is consistent. This gentle affirmative parenting style that has taken over our culture and that has been passed down from one generation to another, and that has been taught to us by the therapists and the experts, is just not working. We've been sold a bill of goods. Let me share with you my favorite quote from the book. It comes towards the end, the very end. She has critiqued therapy, talk therapy, and she has exposed gentle parenting, and she's giving a little bit of advice to parents. And she's pointing out that rather than constantly word vomiting all of our emotions and feelings and trauma, that learning to suppress things is actually a marker of success in life. And she talks about self-control and self-denial and delayed gratification. And she's not saying that you should never go to therapy, and she's not saying that adults can't be helped by a therapist, or even that children can't be helped by a therapist. She's just pointing out that suppression is actually a marker of success. It's a measure of self-discipline and self-control and self-denial. And too often today, she says that going to therapy is like learning to ski by focusing on the trees. And yes, you need to know the trees are there when you're skiing, and you need to know how to avoid them. But if all you ever do is focus on them, you're not actually free to ski. And if all you ever do is focus on trauma and labels and diagnoses, you're not free to live. And so here's some of the things that she says. This is towards the very end of the book, page 249 and 250. Claims from experts that they know, or more laughably, that they care, what's best for our kids with anything comparable to the degree that we do ought to be met with derision, contempt, the creeps. The experts are out there, minting young patients faster than anyone could possibly cure them. They watch a rising tide of adolescent suffering and present themselves as its solution. Most of them ought to be fired on the spot. Remove the spoons, the technology, the hovering, the monitoring, the constant doubt, the diagnosing of ordinary behaviors as pathological, the psychiatric medications you aren't convinced your child needs, the expert evaluations. Banish from their lives everyone with the tendency to treat your child as disordered. You don't need them. You never needed them. And your kids are almost certainly better off without them. Having kids is the best, most worthy thing you could possibly do. Raise them well. You're the only one who can. Let me talk about ministry takeaway, because this is not a Christian book. It's not a ministry book. Regular pastors are called to lead and preach in the context of a local church. And the mission, the primary ministry of the local church, is worshiping God and making disciples. The challenge of making disciples is always colored by the culture that we live in. And so if you live in China or Africa or South America or Western Europe or the United States, you face different challenges because you live in different cultures. In the United States today, one of the cultural challenges that we face is our obsession with all things therapeutic. This increasing tendency to embrace affirming parenting, gentle parenting. And people, meaning Christians in our churches, need to see the folly of this kind of approach, and they need to hear a biblical call to parenthood. Parents need to be challenged to teach their children and to discipline their children and to set a godly example for their children and to make sure that their children are involved in the life of a local church. Now, my only critique of this book is that it's not a Christian approach to parenting. There's nothing here about teaching your children the gospel or disciplining them in a godly way or setting a Christ-like example for them to follow or taking your kids to church so that they are raised in a gospel environment. However, this book is very helpful on exposing some of the lies and the folly in our culture. It's good on the topics of discipline, and it's good on the topics of exposing the dangers of therapy for children. Again, not saying that children never need therapy, and not saying that adults can't benefit from therapy, but just saying that this growing tendency to turn our children over to the therapist because they're experts is not the wisest approach. This tendency to medicate the life out of our kids, to diagnose every behavior as some sort of pathological disorder in our kids, to make everything clinical and medical rather than to think in terms of wisdom and folly and sin and righteousness. It's just not a biblical approach. So, Shrier has not written a Christian book on parenting, but she has written a book that will be helpful to Christians who are parents. And she does present parenting as a beautiful, positive thing, as a good thing, and that's important in a culture where people increasingly see children as a burden and something to be avoided. If you look this book up on Goodreads, you will find it has a 4.13 rating. I think that's pretty low. I gave it a full 5 stars. I think it's extremely helpful. I think pastors who are making disciples and trying to help dads and moms navigate the path forward in a therapeutic culture would benefit from this book. And of course, I think parents would benefit from this book. In fact, I think all parents should read this book. That's the book, Bad Therapy by Abigail Shrier, Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Regular Pastor Podcast. You can subscribe wherever you listen for weekly episodes. You can follow me online at regularpastor.com. You can find me on Goodreads by searching for Landon Coleman. You can see what I have been reading, and I would love to know what you have been reading. Maybe you have a book recommendation or a request for the podcast. I would love to receive it. You can send me an email at landon@emmanuelodessa.com. Until next week, this is The Regular Pastor, out.